pressing the record button.
Greetings. You're listening to Guiding Stars Evolutionary Astrology Radio. This is your host, Kristin Fontana. Guiding Stars is an interactive, soul-centered astrology talk show using the symbolic language of evolutionary astrology to enlighten and empower you on this journey. I'm here today with SÍmõn Vorster, and we are doing a series on Saturn through the houses and signs. And look at, we are all the way to Scorpio, or the 8th house. If you've missed 1 through 7, they are all available through EA Zoom, Guiding Stars on YouTube. Go ahead and do a search on that, and you should find 1 through 7. And so if you know your Saturn placement by house and sign, and we've already discussed it, it's available already for you. And we've done a lot of overview on Saturn. We've kind of talked about all of it, the qualities, the nature of this energy and archetype. We'll repeat some of them today. We always share about Saturn in a little bit of a different way, an angle, depending on how we're feeling that day, I think, right, SÍmõn? But you can listen to the beginning of all those series to learn more about what Saturn means in the birth chart. We'll do a little bit more of that today, but I'd like to welcome back SÍmõn Vorster to Guiding Stars. Welcome back, SÍmõn.
Thanks very much, Kristin. Super excited to be talking about astrology, as always, with you.
Anything you'd like to announce before we get started?
Yeah, just on my website, people that are interested in what I do and how I talk about evolutionary astrology, people that are looking for readings or would like to understand their soul's purpose in that way. My website is www.raising, so as in raising the sound of the volume, raising and vibrations.com. And yeah, there's loads of material on there that you can look at, some courses that I've got there as well to help you understand deeper parts of your chart and stuff. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Well, let's just give an overview a little bit about Saturn in general and why it is so important to understand the nature of this archetype in your birth chart. I really have come to love and embrace this energy. It sheds so much more light, for lack of a better word, on your understanding of just how any soul is put together and how the Saturnian influence really impacts being in the human body, right? Saturn connects to the skin and the bones that holds the soul inside. And so we all have our own wrapping, we all have our own energy, we all have our own support system that keeps us intact and keeps us rooted and grounded in who we are. And gosh, until I really looked at the chart or looked at Saturn within the chart in this way, it just added another level, another layer, another element. I remember, I don't know if I shared this last time, but I was recently thinking about it. A friend of mine who has literally 0 planets in Sagittarius, 0. Oh, excuse me, except for Saturn, but no planets in the 9th house, and she is absolutely Sagittarian in so many ways. A total free spirit, totally into nature and the natural laws of living and being, and a great sense of humor, super wise. And so she has Saturn in Sagittarius and nothing in the 9th house. That Saturn conditions every other planet in her chart. It's literally like every planet in her chart is wrapped with Sagittarius. So it's important that you take a look at that energy, and when you're looking at a chart or reading somebody else's chart, that you take this into account. And of course, we think of Saturn as a planet that it's considered to be the structural nature of consciousness, the container that's holding our soul, but it's also an energy that connects to our career. And so, what are you doing in your work, and is it reflected in this Saturn component? And of course, most likely it will be. So what else do you want to say, SÍmõn, about some Saturn content before we get specific in Scorpio?
Sure. Brilliant introduction, by the way, around the nature of Saturn and the importance of understanding it as the skin, the the structure, the bones of not only your own existence, but your reality, And it's true, you can find somebody that has got Saturn in a house, like, in the sign, and that's it. And they can be deeply colored by that energy. So it's true. It just, Saturn, in a more psychological sense, the way that we are relating to it, Saturn will also speak to where there are dynamics of fear of failure. It will speak to the part of us where we need to go ahead in life and challenge what we feel insecure about. Okay. And how we develop growth in ourselves by recognizing what we're limited by. This is kind of in relationship to Scorpio, but pretty much a Capricorn dynamic, because we'll feel limited there. We'll feel that we are not mature enough. And life and Saturn will provide us with certain tasks and situations that will ask us to grow or to remain disciplined or to set ourselves some restrictions in how we can, best use the circumstance or the situation in our life, and how can we learn from those moments, those situations, and in a sense kind of use the word lesson to mature. And so it also reflects the part of us that we're maturing to, and where we have the hold or have the potential to become authority in that area, where we can have more understanding, more experience, more wisdom as we trade life force for time. That's another thing that's associated with Saturn. It's the part of the consciousness, part of the chart where we will be trading our awareness or our time for the moments of experiences. So that's where the idea of career and comes in terms of looking at Saturn and the 10th house in Capricorn as career in some way. That's true, because we define ourselves through that. But the question is, well, what do we define? How do we define ourselves, and why do we define ourselves that way? And it's because we make choices every day that over a period of time leads to a pattern. And that's why when Jeffrey Wolf Green talked about the moon as the ego, or he was also, whether he said it, he's focused more on the moon though, but the point shows that when we do something consistently every single day, we develop an emotional relationship to it. And it's the choices, Capricorn, that we make every single day that forms our reality, and then our emotional dynamics that interact with that. So we get to see ourselves. And that's why when you deepen your sense of understanding about Saturn in your chart, it's also the part of you that is emotionally defining itself through these choices. And the house placement and sign, of course, will deeply impact what the soul is actually trying to actualize in this lifetime, what unresolved material here. And you'll see it all over the chart when you're doing a reading for a client, for instance, or you're trying to understand, do the investigation about the chart. That the placement of Saturn really provides a lot of information about how the soul will actually go about being able to structure those desires, and how they'll be formed, and how you're maturing into them. Because at the end of the day, the water trinity, or the water signs, the water trinity itself, is how we evolve through the emotional experience. And the earth signs, or in this particular conversation, Saturn, is what boundaries we hold around those experiences. And that's what leads us to be able to reflect, Saturn reflection, on what experiences we've had and how we can integrate them into our lives, and how we grow and mature, and in a sense expand our boundaries. Because the boundary part is very important about Saturn, and it interlinks with how we are able to feel safe as well. And I know that this is a conversation about Saturn in the 8th house, but it seems really relevant to be able to start becoming well versed in the nature of Saturn in our charts. Because if we really begin to work with Saturn in our lives in a very autonomous way, in other words, bringing each day some Saturn energy, then you'd be surprised at how much you can actually not only materialize, because again, material being an earth sign here, but also how you would grow and how much confidence you would develop and how you would feel that you can actually progress in your life. And Saturn, to me, also speaks to that part of our soul's journey where the choices we make and the progression we make and the ability to feel more confident and comfortable and secure in ourselves, and then through that establishing a sense of secure as authority is available to us, and it really does speak to the potential of Saturn in the chart as well, and how it works. So I'll stop there because this I can go on forever and a day, but we'll leave that there.
I like what you said. You talked about the reason why Saturn connects to career in part is because it is how we spend our time, or this
Yes.
what we do with our time. You said it creates, what did you say, habits or?
Yeah, exactly that. When we make choices, so we invest our awareness or our attention into something, and that, like Saturn, pardon me, Jeffrey talks about Pluto in the 10th house as a soul that has to understand about cycles and how cycles work. So Saturn is what he's really referring to here, or Capricorn. So when we invest our attention into a direction, we are committing to a choice, and that choice then has a natural cause and effect, a natural cycle that we must experience ourselves through. So you choose,
Right.
you want a mobile telephone, for example, and you want to pay it off at a certain period of time, then the contract that you're bounded into, you're making a decision, Saturn, you have that for 2 years, and that cycle lasts for that. And it works with everything. So we get into a groove. Okay, well, every single month at this time, we have this conversation on Saturn. That's a Saturn dynamic. We bring our attention to this moment in time, and we invest in this moment, because we could be investing in other things, but we invest in that, and it brings something to the material plane, which is 8 videos on EO Zoom meetings about Saturn.
Right. Love it. The word patterns, I think, is what I was remembering you
Yeah.
said. It was
Mm-hmm.
it was a great word.
Yeah.
Because you think about the natural trine from Capricorn, which is ruled by Saturn, to the 6th house, the Virgo house. It is about our habits. You know, the 6th house is about our daily habits, the work that we do,
Yes.
the busy work, the daily work that builds towards the ultimate career. And Saturn, of course, also has to do with someone's ambitions, you know, and what it is. Saturn is a very much a public energy, right? Your public self. It's what you do as you bring yourself out into the world, even if you're doing it behind scenes, and that work is extended in some way out in the world, as we're doing here. We work from home, a handful of countries away, and,
And an
and,
ocean.
and this information is going out into the world. So anyway, so where's your Saturn again?
Mine is actually in the 8th house. So I have my
It
chart. Well,
is.
no, it's not in
Oh,
the 8th house. It's in Scorpio, but
okay.
um, it's
Okay.
I put up my chart today for today's conversation in a non kind of like, hey, look at me way.
You're just, that's amazing, because, you know, of course, Saturn and Scorpio, they don't want to be exposed, but I love how you can humbly share your experience as a way of teaching others so they can learn from your own travels. I mean, that's really
Mm-hmm.
what this work is about. Is evolutionary astrology does create, um, it requires us all to become a bit more vulnerable and a bit more and open, and yes, uncomfortable, as we were
Mm-hmm.
talking about before this started today. It's just part of the journey. It's necessary in order to evolve. And gosh, with Saturn and Scorpio, well, there can be a lockdown on that, a real lockdown on the depths that the soul needs to access with Saturn there, depending on the aspects it's making. But um, we'll let you talk a little bit about your experience, and I've got a chart too to share. Anything else, or do you want to get specific about Scorpio now?
Let's jump into the 8th house.
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to take it? Do you want to
Sure.
share? Okay.
You got it. I'll jump in.
Um, so, I mean, Saturn in Scorpio. From my experience of Saturn in Scorpio, and my daughter has got Saturn in Scorpio. And if I'm not mistaken, yeah, Saturn in Scorpio. You know, this is a type of energy where, like you mentioned, we're definitely going to the underworld, and that place, depending on your ability to uh, deal with experiences in life that are going to be very in your face, will ultimately dictate how you manage this energy. So far, from what I've seen, Saturn in the eighth house souls, on one level, are born to deal with that anyway. So I'm not entirely sure if the sensitivity towards the underworld is as intense as, say, and this is just a joke, by the way, um, Saturn in Leo Sol had to have an eighth house transit, um, because it can be very, there's a lot of experiences in life, that with Saturn in the eighth house, where you're going to be pulled into death. You're going to be pulled into experiences where early loss probably took place around you or in your life. You're going to be very sensitive to where abandonment and betrayal, and of course, a lot of trust issues will arise for you. And as a child, I suspect that you might, in terms of the need for your karma to be set in motion, you might be born into a family dynamic where there are some deep trust issues between the parents or between yourself and your brothers and stuff, and you'll be sensitive to that, and everybody else might not necessarily be sensitive to those dynamics because this is your own placement. And so you're probably going to spend a great deal of time really feeling that vulnerability that Kristin's talking about in a very big way. The vulnerability is deeply tied into the feeling of the structures maybe or not necessarily being as solid as you need them to be. My direct experience, plus and also in my daughter's case, indirectly, it can be very difficult to, as a child, grow up in an environment where there is a need for the structures to be very solid, and they're not because of an event or circumstances where sudden changes took place. And remember that when we're talking about Saturn in the chart, we're talking about the part of your psyche that needs that stability to feel as if you're on the ground and there is certainty underneath you, because the polarity again is Cancer. So again, eighth house Saturn placements can bring through a lot of experiences where everything's on the edge, everything's on the line, things could change. You could be very sensitive to abuse around power struggles. You might, again, coming into the family dynamics, be sensitive to where there are power struggles between your brother and yourself, or your other two brothers or other two sisters, an example, and you're learning about these things. You're learning about who distributes the resources in the correct way with integrity, who establishes the law in the home that, in a sense, has their own abuse or their own power struggles with themselves and then existentially. And I'll share about this with my own story as well. You're probably very sensitive also to early life situations where the need for intimacy or the need for closeness may have not been met. It may have been met if you've got a good aspect to your Saturn, but if it wasn't, then you're also probably going to have to work through growing up in life through some of the feelings of mistrust and the necessity to actually recognize that as much as early life environments presented some difficult situations where trust was broken, as you get older in life, you're going to have to learn the polarity point of Saturn, which is the necessity for self-reliance. And it's a really important thing. And for me personally, all of the EA astrologers have got our own sense of what we feel is valuable to contribute when teaching this material. And mine is that if we are able to empower ourselves as we get older in life and we become more aware of the dynamics of our own soul's journey and how EA can represent or offer us that opportunity, then the second house, which is the polarity of the eighth, the Saturn evolutionary intention, suggests that we've got to begin internalizing a lot of experiences where the need to trust your own inner sense of stability, your own inner resources is important. And sometimes that comes along where abandonment or betrayal occurs, and it leads you to, firstly, in an abandonment state, you need to feel comfortable knowing you can trust yourself. In the betrayal part, it's a little bit more complex, I think, because there is a part of you that will probably not want to open up your heart again in order to feel safe and secure in a situation because somebody might betray you. So you're going to come into most situations psychologically trying to penetrate to the core of things and ask the deep questions, which gives you that certainty. And I suspect that a lot of people will probably feel that intensity of you as you probably feel it of me when we have these conversations. So yeah, I'll kind of pause there and see if there's anything you want to answer that so far.
Yeah, I mean, of course, that Saturn placement, remember the house, we talk about the house coming first. So often in EA, although the sign is important, of course, as I was sharing earlier with that example. But in Saturn in the 8th house or Saturn in Scorpio, absolutely can also have to do with really like a life and death kind of karmic past linked with some type of authority in your life. Could be, it doesn't necessarily have to be a parent, it could be certain bosses you've had or somebody who is asserting their authority over you. And some, the first image that comes to mind is this sort of military image. But, of course, that's one in a million examples of how that can manifest. But somebody that had the power to make or break you, somebody who had the power to pull the lever on your life is really what that Saturn in Scorpio is about. And so a big part of this is kind of like rebuilding yourself from the ground up, really, from the root up. And it is a life of empowerment, recovering that power. And certainly, as you said, SＩmონ, learning who to trust, who not to trust, and also understanding that you are calling in a whole series and whole gamut of experiences, a relive kind of reality where you're having to rework some of those past circumstantial dynamics with people. And so, of course, with so much Scorpio, then conditioning this whole chart, this whole life can come to feel to be fated in some way. And in evolutionary astrology, we talk about, the more aspects that there are to Pluto, the more fated this life will be. And I would say Saturn in Scorpio has got to be on that list, where Saturn in the 8th house really would apply here as a prominent experience of that. I don't know anybody who has Saturn in Scorpio or Saturn in the 8th who's had this easy breezy life. I mean, they've come here to evolve. And with Saturn in Scorpio, you're really coming here to deal with whatever it is that you've been repressing or not directly dealing with because of fear. There's something in the way that has not allowed you to evolve. And we can't go around it. We got to get all the way into the center of it. So that's a little bit more.
That's brilliant. Like, I really, 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 really loved what you spoke about there. And to highlight the thing about needing to get to the core of it, and that the soul has clearly manifested that sign to initiate something that needs to be looked at in this lifetime, and that you can't avoid anymore. I mean, Jeffrey had Jupiter and Scorpio in the 12th, and he had a Scorpio rising. And for us, both me and you, and for people that knew about Jeffrey Wolf Green in some way, knew that he didn't really look at the situation or the chart, particularly in our souls, and go like, oh, this is this is just this. He was very much about EA can expose you, EA can really get you to the core of what's here, and it's not necessarily for everybody. And it's a really clear example of the subtle nuance that Scorpio adds to the Saturn framework in your life. That that Saturn wants, well, the Scorpio part, but the Saturn really wants to support an exposing of something that needs to be transformed and transmuted. And yeah, there is a lot of fear associated with it. I can definitely, I mean, in my particular instance, and I think my daughter's as well, it's very, very, very much connected to the body a lot. You can actually feel it in the body, the content, like you can feel it in the bones, the fear. And it's a very uncomfortable thing, because one of the things that I read a while ago, just in a sort of like classic astrology book, was that Saturn in Scorpio souls can have a lot of, like you said, repressed emotion that's really, really deep because of the Scorpio dynamic there. And it's not just oh yeah, you have some repressed emotions. It's like it's really, really, really repressed. And when it comes to the surface, it's going to be big. It's going to be intense, and you're going to feel it. And that was the key. And this was ironically actually happening at the exact time that I was having a Saturn return. So it's not surprising that the tone of the conversation today, at least, and the context of Saturn in the 8th house of Scorpio, people are not here to pick roses and do funny little things, and paint bunnies and stuff like that. It's like it's
no.
like these are the type of people that you can see on their face. They have, like I said, you're having tea with Hades, and these are not the types of souls that turn around and say, oh, life's like this. It's like, come on, let's go. It's, if you ever want to kind of get a prep talk from somebody that's gonna get you motivated, invite an 8th house soul or an 8th house Saturn soul to really get you there, because boy, are you going to get it straight.
Definitely, you're dealing with the dark. You're dealing with your shadow, your own shadows, your own fears, the stuff that you just don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. But you got to do it. And it's time. I think that's the whole point of Saturn. It's time. This life says it's time. It must be done. I mean, I really don't know anybody who has the signature where they haven't been dealing with the dark on many levels. It's like the dark night of the soul. 8th house Pluto's can totally attest to the same kind of experience. So, yeah, I mean, you're talking about the people that are drawn to this work, and you aren't attracted to this work unless you are ready. Because I have this experience of meeting Jeffrey for the first time, and he spoke on Saturn. It was when Saturn was transiting through Taurus, and this was in 1999. And I mean, everything that comes out of that mouth of his is just like, he doesn't waste words. So he had me at hello, good morning. It was just like Scorpio style, and yet very compassionate at the same time. But so much of what the message was about how natural law distorted and what it became through the Saturnian influence. And so it was one of these timely moments, a time in my history that was just, it just rattled me in the best possible way. And so it's just so essential to just to be able to look at the things that you're afraid of and ask yourself, why am I afraid of this, Scorpio? But I knew that day when I met him that I'd walk through a door that I could not unwalk through again. Like I knew, and I at that point it had been all that whole weekend was listening to others. I was listening to other astrologers. It was a conference, so there's many astrologers there, and I could feel my soul like avoiding this, or knowing that once I walked in that room, I just had this knowing. It was really, no, I wasn't super conscious. It was like happening on a deeper unconscious, in a deeper unconscious place. So you don't enter this work and enter your chart in this way unless you're ready. And Saturn and Scorpio people, they're not all ready to evolve. They can go kicking and screaming because Saturn can really put a lid on what it is that your soul needs to go to. And so, of course, as you said, SÍmõn, if that Saturn is making nice aspects, then it's going to be a lot easier. But it can also speak to, and one of the chart I have today is that Saturn is opposing Pluto. And so there's a lockdown, and this has just been lifetimes where this soul has not been able to, to address address the resistance.
Right.
So
Okay.
let's pull up your chart.
Yeah. Sure. There's your chart that you brought up, but we'll look at this one, and then we'll go back to that one. I mean, you can see it on the screen, right? The chart.
Yeah.
Okay. You can see very clearly that there's quite a lot that the soul decided to go, you know what, we need to focus on this. I think that's my internal joke to myself. Whenever I teach EA and I talk about squares to the nodes and stuff like that, and I use my own chart, the comedy I always bring to it, because I need it, because otherwise I don't know what I would do, is that obviously something along the lines needed to have an intense focus for me to be able to go, look, dude, you need like my soul was going, you need to focus on this, you need to pay attention to that, and it's really, really essential. It's just, it's Mars Venus, the 8th house. The planet ruler of the Mars Venus is the Mercury. That's conjunct Pluto. Pluto and Saturn are conjunct each other. The sun's between the two, and they're all in the 10th house. So there's a tremendous amount of consistent energy repeating the same thing around dynamics in relationships, dynamics in sense of authority. And I'll share a couple of themes that are, part of this that you actually spoke about. And one of them is, so parents, I think the Pluto, Sun, Mercury, Saturn narrative over there is very clear. But, I grew up in South Africa, and at the moment, South Africa is a place that I don't think that people want to live there. It's really, really terrible at the moment, and it's a sad thing, because it has a lot to do with the psychological and emotional repression of people, and segregation, and the laws and the regulations and the regimes and the oppression. And I grew up in this country, and karmically speaking, it's ingrained in me. You can even see as a kind of side thing over there with Uranus and Jupiter on the south node, that there's a lot of kind of like unresolved trauma around the culture. And I have a lot of sadness towards what has happened. It's a place that I have a deep connection to, because it's nature in a way that's different from other places that I've been to in the world. I feel Africa as a place that touches my heart very deeply. And to feel like it's not a place that is safe is how much of that Saturn plays out in my life, because it's not the country that I can live in, 10th house. It's not the borders and the boundaries. It's not the governments. And so that's that. And then there's how I was raised. I mean, you can see that the Pluto is sitting at 29, right? So when Pluto hits my Saturn at the age of 5, two things happen to me. Okay, I got to show you the synchronicity of these things. It's absolutely nuts. So one, my mom and dad split up, and that gets set in motion, the separation dynamic. Two, they get split up because of complexes around power and resources, essentially, right? My mom gets into a new relationship because the person represented more power than my dad in that sense. And this is the second thing, literally while this Pluto was going over my Saturn, in order for me to, this was, I think I was like 4 years old, in order for me to have been collected from my dad, my mom got the police and an actual like written document. I've got it all over here, stating that this was a warrant to take me away from my dad. So sort of
Wow.
like, but here's the thing I want to talk about the Saturn is, and this is a really, really interesting to uncover. And this is what I mean about the depth of going to Hades and not playing around. Is one of the things that is deeply, deeply part of the kind of wound that the soul carries is I didn't get a choice to hold on to the thing that I felt attached to, because at the age of 4, like, and it this is what I want to touch on. I touch on the sensitivity and the intensity of loss that takes place. So as a 4-year-old, there could have been like a bunch of cool toys that I had around there, and I'd never seen them again because of the nature of what was taking place was just being removed straight away by the authorities. And it wasn't negative. It was just that my dad was just like, okay, well, my mom obviously felt the need to put the law enforcement in place in order for me to be taken away from him so that she can then kind of nurture it. And, there's a whole entire story around that. But the thing that's really striking about is the nature of how it occurred. There's that Saturn in the 10th house there, and Pluto was transiting on that. And when you talk about the conditioning of reality, that's pretty much been my whole entire life. Every relationship I've entered, every thing that I've entered has always been plagued by this underlying sense of I can't commit because I don't like the feeling of loss. And EA is one of the reasons as to why I've been able to progressively heal this trauma, because it allows you to access it, and you have to be really comfortable going to that point in yourself to be able to uncover what it is that's there. And so when you talk about deep fear, there is my body can actually go into like an intense, like the disassociation in my nervous system and in my body can be so intense that it actually like starts to freeze and it will start to shake. When you get into like a cold water, for instance, and you get out and your body starts to shiver like that, I can do that just when there is confrontation
Right.
of two authorities. Like it's really, really intense. So there are a lot of like real experiences with Saturn in the 10th or Saturn in Scorpio particularly that have brought about the truth of deep repressed emotions and fear. And you really are, I don't think you get a choice. I think you have to face it. And if you don't, it will just be there as a trap holding you hostage because you are unable to like step into your full power. And I think that's what the gift is. You have to really be able to step into your full power. So for me in the 10th house there, it's like I know that part of that journey is to have to reparent myself in the way that I need to be reparented, but also to uncover a lot of those deeply wounded parts of abuse and power. Because my stepdad, for instance, was deeply traumatized and had an incredibly like messed up sense of power. Man, whoa, I can tell you stories about my childhood around that was just not okay. So there is a lot of things around that Saturn archetype that now as an adult, like I'm reintegrating the ability to put my own boundaries in place. Because there's another thing in this chart you can see very clearly is the struggle around boundaries. And I think that's actually what the Saturn focus is about. It's the capacity to reassert my boundaries in a way that's healthy for me. So I'll pause there because I don't want to talk about this for a million days, but this is pretty much a real life experience of how that Saturn plays out a lot.
Oh, wow. I just, that example is so graphic with the authorities literally taking you away from your father.
Yep.
Amazing.
I mean,
Of course, the lessons within this, why did you choose this Saturn? And that, Mars, Venus, balsamic in the 8th. I mean, of course, this is a life where you're having to become your own inner authority and, to access that strength within yourself. And so, of course, that's why not only did you not have the luxury of growing up with both of your original parents, the stepfather was a hot mess himself. So it doesn't allow you to lean on that on
Um,
that.
I mean, it's actually pretty hilarious when I share it, because it's like there's no other way to look at it. You can see there that there's a Pluto conjunct the Sun and Saturn, and all four of my parents, I feel, and I use them literally like that. All four of my parents that raised me, in the sense, because both of them remarried, each of them holds a personality trait that is part of my chart, right? And
Hmm.
it really was bizarre when I looked at it, and I was like, oh my god, like my stepdad holds this personality, and there it is in my chart over there. And then you got, and all four of them were deeply disempowered, and all four of them just didn't know how to be able to parent it in that way. And there was this like huge gaping hole in my psychological need for structure, Pluto in the 10th, where that's not there. And so a lot of that Saturn in the 10th house, and then that's why I said in the beginning of the conversation, I'm talking from direct experience, because Saturn return and Saturn squares are really intense. I mean, my third Saturn square, which is when it squares Saturn, that's when my dad actually passed away from cancer. So, you
Mm.
know, and the loss occurred when he got remarried on the ascendant. So when I talk about Saturn as the ability to empower yourself through realizing your own need, like to establish your sense of certainty and security within yourself, my experience of it, of needing to get to a point where I can actually interact with reality and not be completely like disempowered, came through that attitude. And that is the gift of Saturn in my life. Was, okay, come on, kiddo, it's 29, you're a Saturn return. Here's two options. Do you want to fulfill your dreams, or do you want to dream about fulfilling your dreams and not knowing how to actually actualize them? And so I kind of made the choice to go around the dream thing, like let's go do the dream thing. But it wasn't like everything landed in my lap. It was like, okay, right, so you want that, cool, here are a bunch of examples and situations and circumstances that you need to go through. And the weird thing about it is that in 2018, just before I went to the States in March, I had a new moon take place. I think it was a new moon or full moon, when the moon moved over my Saturn. And that day I received my Swedish passport at the exact same
Oh.
time that I think Saturn was transiting my Neptune. And
Hmm.
and I think like Saturn was on my south node at the time when I'd received the papers that my stepmom had, kept for me, because she wanted to make sure that she knew that whatever took place in my life as a child, my dad, was never. He didn't once think that he needed to abandon me. He was always the opposite, and it was something that she kept on consistently enforcing. Like, whatever it is that you think about your dad, it was the complete opposite. And I have all the papers. Like, I was literally looking through all of the documentation of all of the betrayal and abandonments and the way that everything was happening. And it was just like, it was so bizarre when Saturn was transiting my south node in Sag.
Mm. And you had to relook at everything.
Yeah, yeah. And
Mm.
it's such a trip. It really is. But it's, and the point here is, again, like the empowerment process from it. Like, as you deeply process through all of these things that you don't want to look at, like you said, you actually uncover a tremendous amount. And as much as it seems as if it's not something that's comfortable, and it isn't sometimes, it's really empowering to be able to actually step into that sense of authority and re-empower it, because that's ultimately what that Scorpio wants. It wants you to say, come on, like, let's re-empower the part of yourself that's disempowered. Remember the psychological limitations. That's what Scorpio represents, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Right. I mean, I just see all these balsamic signatures too. We've got the Pluto Mercury balsamic. The Mercury rules the Virgo with Mars and Venus balsamic. Um, and of course, your moon in Gemini is reflecting to families here.
yes,
And then that moon trines the Mercury, Pluto, even the Sun, even the Saturn with a long orb or a broader orb there in terms of representing different personalities of yourself or pieces of yourself. It's amazing.
yeah, definitely true. Very much so. I've definitely observed that moon dynamic, and those. That's what I meant about the, like, this, all of this stuff in Gemini in the fifth, and it's like these dual families fighting for possession of the child, but never actually considering the child.
Right. Oh my gosh. Look at that Mars Venus and Virgo squaring your nodes exactly, and the trauma that it caused you. In this other chart, it's interesting because
Yeah.
you can go ahead and leave your chart there. Oh,
Okay.
well, either way. Yeah, we'll go here. This same person shared when he was a child and he heard his parents screaming or yelling at each other. He would run into the laundry room and hide. He was just petrified that something horrible was happening. He was sure someone was going to die. Would they get divorced? I mean, it sounds so irrational, but it's like, it was his greatest fear because of, you can see the things that had come before with the South Node in Scorpio and Neptune on that South Node. The Neptune rules his Saturn and Pisces in the 8th. And so there's all these themes around abandonment, loss, betrayal, broken families. And the real issue in this chart is just, again, this lockdown of emotion. That Pluto in the second house wants to, it's like we talk about in EA, it's the frog in the well. It's like looking through the peephole in a sense. Only that version of the sky, and there's such a fixity to this second house, 8th house, and that through that opposition and absolute resistance. And yet this life, there's been a lot of traumas, there's been a lot of emotional shocks through relationships. That Venus is literally moving into a square to the nodes, but it's definitely not the first lifetime there's been shocks. It's almost like this soul has just been caught in this place where he's become frozen and emotionally frozen and not able to move into that experience of certainly objective, I would say, with the Venus and Aquarius, but not able to really go there because of the trauma that has happened before, what he's seen, what he's experienced, and then the fallouts of that. It's been absolute devastation.
I mean, you can see, I spoke to a lot of people with that South Node conjunct Neptune, and honestly, my heart goes out to a lot of them, because I think from the psyche's perspective and the ego's perspective, any like Neptune itself, when we've had a negative experience of it, is very uncomfortable. Outer planets themselves are always going to be uncomfortable to our personality selves, but I think Neptune can definitely be a very difficult thing to process as a child when it comes on the South Node, simply because those early life imprints, the womb of the prior lifetime, and the necessity to re-imprint the things that are needing to be resolved in this lifetime. I mean, there's probably a lot of uncertainty, a lot of chaos, a lot of things that have occurred that just came out of nowhere, or that weren't seen.
Yeah.
And the likelihood of feeling safe in moments where the situation could change any moment is so likely that you can see how they can be frozen and stuck in that place, going, could I potentially even move forward here?
The problem here in this instance is that it's not that he's not sensitive and emotional. He's extremely sensitive and emotional underneath, the trauma, I would say.
Yeah, exactly.
Because what trauma creates with that Venus in Aquarius, what trauma creates is a detachment in order to survive. And so what's happened is, because he's not connected to his emotional body, that Venus rules the 4th house, it's created further shocks. Most of the traumas come not so much as a child, although these instances where the parents were fighting, they didn't lead to the worst outcome. It was more in his own relationships, where he was required to participate in them emotionally.
Sure.
And then the partner not getting what they emotionally needed, so went elsewhere, kind of thing. And there's a natural innocence about Saturn and Pisces, and a high degree of disillusionment that this soul has experienced in this life and other lifetimes. And it's important that you understand with the Saturn and Pisces, of course, it's in the 8th house, that these souls are learning to see people clearly, to see the situation clearly, and to, of course, there's an energy around knowing how to extend your trust and where. And so, it is a lifetime here. Look at that. It is a full phase opposition. So again, you're seeing that restates kind of where this theme gets expressed the most. The fears come all the way in through this life, but it's in the personal relationships, where he's having to participate, not as a child, but as an adult, right?
Right.
How far can that person go? I mean, with Saturn and Pisces in the 8th, when it's well aspected without that opposition, can be an incredibly deep soul who's willing to, to absolutely go as far as is necessary. But there's a lockdown on this. And it's prevented, this is why evolution takes so long.
Yeah.
Because it's just, like you said, tea with Hades. it's not a joyride all the time.
It's like you really have to have this conversation. You can't go anywhere, because everything's exposed, and you have to deal with that vulnerability and that insecurity and that fear. And when you eventually move past the guardians of the gate, because that's what really happens. The fear is there to protect you from not losing yourself emotionally and mentally. For me personally, I believe this, and I think there are a lot of other many people out there that will speak for the same, that Saturn is also, and we've spoken about this, right? Saturn is also the guardian of our own psyche, in the sense that he's going to hold in what is necessary to keep us safe. And if we can't process the things outside of that realm, then we're not ready for it yet. And that's why Aquarius, in my view, correlates to trauma, because it's the experiences outside the scope of what we can actually digest that occurs for us, that we can't process and assimilate into our Saturn, so we can broaden the boundary. So we essentially shut down. We can't process it. It becomes emotionally repressed. Hence, therapy being something that allows us to open up whatever it is that's been put there. And again, Saturn in the 8th house is somebody, Saturn in Scorpio, wants to and needs to firstly meet the fear in themselves that stops them from seeing beyond their own psychological state of disempowerment. And that's a very triggering statement to make, and I get it, and it is. And a lot of us can get a lot of emotions come to the surface, where when those emotions come to the surface, the general thing that Saturn in the 8th house wants to do, Saturn in Scorpio, is, why did I feel that way? What was the root cause of that emotional attachment, and why am I triggered by it? Because that's really, really healthy conversation to have in all circumstances when we get triggered by something that's outside of ourselves, because it assumes the position that what it is that's triggering us is, and again, very likely, it's, unless people are actually purposely doing it to you, it's something of your own. And it's something that's you have that emotional attachment inside of yourself, and that's unresolved. So you need to fix that, or not fix that, but move through it. And that's how I also understand the purpose of Pluto. Ultimately, at the end of the day, there's something that's buried in the subconscious there that needs to come to the surface, and whatever experience was that you had that disempowered you in that moment. And that's why Pluto and Saturn and in the 8th house in Scorpio are very much lifetimes where a lot of your experience will need to be about making sense of the parts of yourself that have been disempowered. And some of those disempowered states are like where your boundaries have been obliterated. Like in this person's chart over here, a lot of people with that Saturn Chiron conjunction, you'll speak to them and they'll have a lot of pain around their own personal boundaries being broken, and their sense of authority being stripped away through experiences where they didn't know. Because again, We're talking about intimacy here with Scorpio. We're talking about the capacity to trust. And if you're shown, like in my case, for instance, and I'm sure in your time as well, growing up, corporal punishment was something that was normal on some level,
Right.
and today, if you took out a stick and you said to a child that you did something wrong, and then you hit them 6 times or 5 times to induce a sense of rightness about what their behavior was, then as much as in the moment that Capricorn repressive kind of patriarchal attitude of getting somebody to learn their consequences of their mistakes in that way, that child is forever going to have that wound inside of their body's cellular memory that says, my boundaries were violated and I couldn't speak up for myself. So they become frozen. So the point here with Pluto 8th house souls, and sorry, not Pluto 8th house souls, Saturn 8th house souls and Saturn in Scorpio, is that you will have to confront some of those moments where the moment of disempowerment is so intense that of course you're going to be sitting in a state of fear, because you have to relive the moment where you couldn't speak up for yourself, or you couldn't assert the boundary, or you couldn't say no.
Yeah, one thing that, there's a few things that have come out of his mouth in a session would be, one thing is like, if this or that ever happened, I would never, ever be able to recover. Like
Exactly.
a fear, right? So it's that losing yourself to an experience without, and so the conversation from my side becomes, well, more importantly, it's about asking yourself why your soul has creating this. Why are you having to call this in? Your soul is creating this for its own evolutionary purposes. I can understand how, if that happened, it could create a kind of hysteria that would be hard to recover from, for sure. But it's like, literally, it was that I would never be able to recover from that. Not, I think it was not even, no, I don't know how I would recover. It was literally, I would not be able to recover from that. Like, literally could see, kind of the eyeballs go back in the head. And even another comment was, if this or that happened, I just sit on a train track and wait for the end, kind of thing. It's that kind of, there is no point that going to that kind of extreme, that kind of trauma where there's nothing left to live for. So it's these extremes, where this old stuff is coming up, life and death, where maybe there's been life or death going on, a lot of loss, but also things that have occurred that didn't make this soul want to live anymore.
Yep.
Seriously, I just cannot physically live anymore with knowing this or that, it's that kind of extreme and intensity.
Yep.
And yet we have to go through these things in the physical body as humans, as souls in a human form. We can't work this stuff out any other place.
Yes. Yes.
So anyway, on a lighter note,
that's where you can find us.
Saturn in Scorpio, it's Tea with Hades. I'll never forget that. Thank you for that one, SΥmµn. We are here to evolve, and so remember that if you've got clients with this signature, it's an intense one. And SΥmµn knows, you can email him. He's got firsthand experience with it. So thank you so much again, SΥmµn, for today. Saturn in the 8th, or Saturn in Scorpio. We're going to come back next month with a look at Saturn in Sagittarius, or Saturn in the 9th house. That's mine. Whoop. Love that.
Cool.
Sagittarian placement. It's saved me, I think, a few hundred times along my way. And yeah, but we'll have more to say about that. It's funny that I said that it saved me, and yet it's the very thing that I was raised with this religion, right? So Saturn in Sag does not necessarily mean the free spirit all the time. You could be born into a family where beliefs are really force-fed into your your world. So
one quick question for you, just because you mentioned something earlier today about Jeffrey Green. His south node lands on your Saturn, doesn't it, or around that area?
Yeah, his south node. My Saturn is in the 9th, but it's in Pisces.
Oh, okay. Well, then his moon. But yeah, Okay.
His moon is on my his moon is on my Saturn. Yeah. But we have a lot of, I mean, I have Sun, South Node, and Mercury all in Sagittarius with his, and so of course I'm going to resonate
Exactly.
with the material, right? Like what
Mm-hmm.
he was speaking was my truth. I'm like, yes, teach me. I want to know this stuff. I mean, we already know it, right? When we hear the truth, it's, yeah, we know it. You know it when you hear something and it really, the body tells you it's true. So that's the power of this work. You know, the truth does not require belief. And that was what I remembered when I first heard him speak in this lifetime. So, yeah. Thank God for this work. And we'll be back next month. And I will also be back with David Green with our series on looking at Mercury and Jupiter and the planetary phases, and Rose Marcus as well. So keep an eye on those webinars as well. Thanks so much, SΥmµn.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Until next time, namaste.